Wasn't too bad.
Only one. Okay, cool. So first thing we're going to be going over is this table here on the mock exam. And so it has to do with costs, right? So the first one is, what is the fixed cost of production at Jimmy's Gigaplot factory? I don't know what a gigaplot is.
It's made
Yeah, it's a made-up thing. But how do we go about solving this?
total cost, subtract variable cost.
Right. So let's start with that. So this is actually a pretty good formula to know. So total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable costs. Okay? So that's pretty much what you're going to be using. That and then this one to solve this whole chart. Does that make sense? And we'll be adding on to that as we go along, just things that we think would be good for you guys to know. So right here we've got a total cost of what?
38.
Right. And then what is our variable cost?
13.
Okay, and how do we figure out our fixed cost?
Subtract variable cost.
Right. So then what would be our fixed cost?
25.
25. That's right. So C would be the answer. And then would that just be our fixed cost for that first column? No, right. Fixed cost is fixed. It doesn't change. So that means that fixed cost will be 25 for all the way down from 1 to 8. Okay? So good job, guys. You just solved the column. That was fast.
Sweet.
Well done. Okay. So now that we've got that, number 2. What is the average variable cost of producing 3 gigaplots at Jimmy's Gigaplot factory? How do we figure this one out?
7 minus 105 by 3.
Yeah. So walk us through that a little bit slower and say what all those numbers are.
So the fixed cost is that's already set. So if you do the total cost minus that variable cost, or fixed cost would be the variable cost for that column, or the row at 3.
Right.
And then just define the average and divide it by.
Right. Exactly. Well done. So did you guys hear what he said? Does everybody understand that? Okay. We'll go over it. So right here, right, he's saying that we already know that fixed cost all the way down the line is 25. Okay. Right here, it's asking for the average variable cost at 3 units. So, okay, so here we know that this is 25, right? And that our total cost is 70. So we know that total cost is equal to our fixed cost plus our variable cost, right? So here, we know our fixed cost is 25. We don't know what this is. We know that our total cost is 70. So to solve for this, we just have to subtract our fixed cost from our total cost. You guys follow that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. And then to find our average variable cost, we just divide. Every time you guys see average on one of these, all it means is you take this number and then divide it by the quantity. So that's what this formula over here is saying. So I wrote this out kind of weird. I'll write it out a little bigger. So all it's saying is whenever you have like an average total cost, average variable cost, or an average fixed cost, all those are equal to is your fixed cost times your quantity, your variable, or divided by your quantity, variable cost divided by your quantity, or your total cost divided by your quantity. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure we don't lose anyone. So, what would be the right answer for number 3? Or 2. Sorry, I apologize.
2 is 15D.
Cool. Then the next one. What is the average total cost of producing 6 gigaplots at Jimmy's Gigaplot factory? Try and do this one on your own real quick. It'll give you like 30 seconds to a minute. Anybody got it? Okay, you want to run me through it real quick?
Yeah. So with the variable cost being 108, we know that the fixed cost is 25, so that adding those together is 133. Right? And then dividing that by the quantity, which is 6, gives us the average. the average total cost of $22.70.
Perfect. Does anybody, I'll set that anyways, does anybody get lost on that? Is everybody okay with these? They're not too bad, but there's a lot of different variables and stuff, but just once you simplify them, they're pretty straightforward. Okay,
So
now, what was that?
it was C.
It was C.
Right.
Yeah. All right, now number 4. What is the marginal cost of the 4th gigaplot at Jimmy's gigaplot factory? This one's going to be a little bit harder. Yeah, what's up?
Oh, never mind.
You're going to answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Go. Walk us through it if you can.
Is it 19?
Believe so, yeah.
So basically, you want to finish out the total cost for the quantity of 3 and quantity of 4, because you're going from 3 to 4, because you're trying to find the marginal cost of the 4th gigaplot. And to figure out that it's 19, you end up getting for quantity of 3, 70 for your total cost, and then quantity of 4 turns out to be 89. You just subtract the 2 and you get 19.
It's perfect. Perfect. So, who remembers our little trick that we had in one of our last review sessions about what the word marginal means? Right, right. So marginal is equal to with 1 additional unit. So if we're talking about marginal cost, we're talking about the cost associated with producing 1 more unit. We're talking about the marginal revenue. We're talking about the revenue associated with producing 1 more unit, right? So just like he said, when you take your total cost, you're looking at, okay, between these 2 units, when I move from 1 unit to the next amount, from 3 to 4, what is the cost associated with producing that 1 more unit? So you take, like he said, the total cost of the one before, and the total cost of the one that you're on, and you subtract them. Does that make sense? Cool?
So it's 89 minus.
Right. Right. Okay. Any other questions on these? You okay? Cool. All right. Number 5. I'll take this one there. Okay, this one. The efficient scale for the firm is the quantity of output that. Does anyone want to answer that one? Not quite. Good thought, but not quite.
Is it
D?
Is it D?
No.
C.
It is C.
My gosh.
Minimizes average total cost. And you want to explain that to him?
I just always kind of learned that's just like a rule.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Why is it the rule?
So, I don't know if you guys remember. You guys remember the whole economies of scale, diseconomies of scale,
Yeah.
all that type of thing. So, what does economies of scale and diseconomies of scale have to do with what curve? Right. So then, how do we determine where economies of scale are and diseconomies of scale are? What does that mean?
Right at the lowest point.
Right, so you take the lowest point on the curve. So here, about there, right? So then, if you're looking for something that is the efficient scale is just what they call this point right here at the bottom, because everything up until here is an economy of scale. Everything over here is economy of scale, right? This area down here where it's, if you could like enlarge this so that it looked more like that and this was flat. So the area where that's flat, that's also called constant returns to scale. Okay, something else that you might want to write down.
Oh, right. Sorry.
So this area down here, so right, this is an economy of scale, this economy of scale, and this would be called constant returns. Really? Oh, my bad. Drop that. To scale. Or the efficient scale.
So it's called constant return scale or the efficient scale.
So efficient scale is just the lowest point on the average total cost curve. And constant returns to scale is the whole area where that's flat, where it's perfectly flat. But you can pretty much use them interchangeably.
So we pretty much just answered the next question. Economies and diseconomies of scale explain. Anyone?
Is it just
That's right. That's right. So let's walk through that real quick. Why is the average total cost curve U-shaped?
because with economies of scale, like basically you're like producing units to a point where it starts costing you more money to like produce more, I guess. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain.
Yeah, so let's just talk about what do these lines represent, right? What does average total cost represent? The amount of money on average is taking you to produce, right, not additional units, but it's taking you to produce, right? So at first, when you look at the cost curve, right, you're seeing this and you're saying, okay, right here, if we produce one, we've got like one guy assembling the whole thing. It's going to cost us, it's going to take him 5 hours, plus all the parts. It's going to take a long time. But then you say, all right, if we get 2 people, we can have one guy assemble half, one guy assemble the other half. And then as it keeps going, then your average cost will drop depending on the amount of output that you're putting out. Does that make sense? But then you get to a point here where you reach it where it's no longer getting less expensive for you. And then all of a sudden it starts to get more expensive for you to produce more units. Does that make sense? So everything from here to here is an economy of scale because it's economic for you to continue to scale, right? Scaling in business means you're making it bigger, right? You're producing more. And then everything over here is a diseconomy of scale because the more you produce, the more it's going to cost you. It's not necessarily a good thing. Does that make sense to everyone? Kind of breaking it down to a really low level. Some of you guys might be thinking, I already know this, I'm sorry. But just figured to do better. So then, go back to this question. So economies and diseconomies of scale explain why the firm's long run average total cost curve is U-shaped. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, number 7. Which of the following is not a characteristic of a perfectly competitive market? Yeah. B. Why is that?
I learned 20 minutes ago.
Atta girl. No, that's awesome. I love it. Okay, so
Easy entry.
yeah, right. Perfectly competitive market. There's no barriers to entry. It's not hard to get into. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna pull up something real quick
It's word
for
for
myself,
word.
hopefully. Come on, y'all. So this table in your book is going to be super useful. I would just highly recommend that you all write that down somewhere, take a picture of it, memorize it. Just memorize these different characteristics of the different types of markets. And in case any of you are just wanting to look it up later, I included the page number there in the corner. 203. Go on. For those of you watching online, page 203, it's a little green box. 4 different market models.
So you think there's going to be a ton of questions based on this?
I think so. I think so. I mean, there's several chapters just on this stuff, but I'm not kidding. Memorize this table, and you'll probably have a lot of it down. Okay, so just go through. As a matter of fact, how about we just read through this real quick? Is that all right with you guys?
Yeah.
Can I get a couple volunteers, just like one for each of the market models? Okay, can you go through pure competition? And just so you guys know, these are listed in order, okay? From the least amount of firms to the most amount of firms, okay? So there are some places in the book where it lists them out of order. I like this chart because it lists them in order from most firms to least firms. So can you read that?
Alright, so for pure competition, there's a very large amount of firms. The type of product is standardized. The control over price, there's no control over price. The conditions of entry, it's very easy. There's no barriers of entry. Non-price competition, there's none. And an example of pure competition is agriculture.
Okay. So do any of those things need any further explanation? Any of those characteristics? Yeah.
What exactly does it mean by non-price competition?
So non-price competition.
Price taker.
Yeah. So non-price competition is like you are competing by making your shirts more like fashionable, or making them have a different material, or your advertising is different. But with stuff like agriculture, right? You can't really do that because it's like, oh, my oranges are better than his oranges.
So let's talk about like branding, for example.
Yeah, branding is an example of non-price competition.
So all the competition that does not have to deal with how low or high your price is.
Right.
So
Right.
pure
All competition doesn't have to do with price. It's a really good way to put it.
So pure
Or
competition.
non-price competition.
Yeah,
So
I know.
pure
It's just,
competition has no
it's
like
just
branding.
rewording it.
Yeah, no branding. There's no like commercials that are competing with each other.
Yeah.
Because like we were talking about, if you were to run a commercial for oranges, it's just going to make people want oranges in general, right?
Yeah,
you can't compete with other orange farms.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, can I get another, for monopolistic competition?
Yeah, so monopolistic competition, number of firms, many, type of product, differentiated, control over price, some within rather narrow limits, and then that one says conditions of entry, relatively easy. Non-price competition is considerable emphasis on advertising, brand names, and trademarks. Examples would be retail, trade dress, retail trade dresses, and shoes.
Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions on that? So there's a relatively large amount of sellers, right? Like in shirts, for example, you've got Adidas, Nike, North Face, Ruka, you know what I mean? And they're selling slightly differentiated products and a lot of their emphasis is on their brand name, their advertising. And you might see some price fluctuations, you know what I mean? In like t-shirts, you know, if we throw out some of the outliers like Big Baller Brand and Gucci, they're like $500 a shirt. But it's usually within, you know, like a $10 to $50 range. So there's some, like, they can kind of control their price, but not really. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Why is it called monopolistic competition? Because whenever I hear monopolistic, I just think of like monopolies.
Yeah, it is weird. I don't like it either. I mean, what's
Well, I mean,
Because it's closer to a monopoly instead of just pure like.
Isn't an oligopoly even closer to
Well, like
yeah,
like
yeah, it is.
I mean,
What would
there's
you call it?
polypolies.
Huh?
Polypoly, which is what it was called like 100 years ago.
Yeah, or a duopoly. Yeah, for like oligopoly. But anyway, I don't want to confuse you guys. So yeah, monopolistic competition. Focus on the word competition there, okay? Just think like there's pure competition and then there's the other competition, okay? And just kind of ignore the word monopoly because don't let it confuse you. So it goes pure competition, monopolistic competition, from freest to most concentrated, oligopoly, pure monopoly. Can I get a volunteer for oligopoly?
Second.
Thank you, man.
Oligopoly has a few number of firms. The type of product is standardized or differentiated. The control over price is limited by mutual interdependence, considerable with collusion. Conditions of entry, there is significant obstacles. The non-price competition typically is a great deal, particularly with product differentiation. Examples of steel automobiles firm implements many household appliances.
Does that make sense? So another example of this is my dad actually used to work for Intel, Do you guys know what Intel is? They make computer parts. And they owned, I think, like 90% of the computer chip market share. And then there was like two other competitors. It was like AMD and Samsung. So that would be considered an oligopoly. It's a very concentrated oligopoly, but it's an oligopoly. There's like 3 or 4 really big sellers. They have pretty good control over price, but they can't completely control the price because their competitors will undercut them.
Airplanes like Boeing versus Airbus.
Right. There's like 3 airplane companies I can name. Boeing, Airbus, and like Cessna. But Cessna makes like those little planes where people go up and die like every few months. Okay. Pure monopoly. Can I get a volunteer for that? Thanks, man.
Pure monopoly, number of firms, 1, type of product, unique, no plus substitutes, control over price, considerable, conditions of entry, blocked, non-price competition, mostly public relations, advertising, and examples is local utilities.
Yep. Good example. So like you've never seen power companies competing, right? Because there's only one. Sometimes you'll see an ad from Rocky Mountain Power talking about how much they love the community, but
It's public relations.
exactly, it's a public relations, right? It's not that they're saying, hey, choose us over something else. They're like, hey, we're your only option. Don't hate us because we might suck sometimes. Like, we care about you.
Yeah, or like the constant rebranding of, what is it now, Dominion Energy or
Oh,
whatever.
did it change again?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been rebranded.
Yeah. So does that make sense to everybody? Is there any other questions on this chart? Okay. My 2, like if I had to, if you guys only left here with 2 things that I think would be really helpful in the test, this would be one of them. And the other thing would be profit maximization / loss minimization. So those are the 2 things that I think will get you the greatest amount of questions. So really hammer this in, spend some time with it, get really comfortable with it, okay? All right, number 8. Refer to the above diagram. The firm's average fixed costs are what? Yeah. Can somebody explain that to me?
Well, I was just thinking, you have your average variable costs, and if that was, then if there was nothing else, then that would also be your average total cost. So whatever is in between the average variable cost and your average total cost must also be your average fixed cost.
Right. It's a really good way to put it. And you want to explain it a little bit more?
Sure, did everybody kind of understand that? So average total cost has to be the total of average variable cost and average fixed cost. So you know average variable cost is here. So in this distance must be equal to the average fixed cost, right? In order to get it to add up to average total. That makes sense to everybody?
Is it a one-time figure right now?
Yeah, so you have an average total cost above the average variable cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the average total cost is average variable cost plus average fixed. And so this distance here has to be the average fixed in order for it to add up to average total cost.
So
Yeah.
why do the lines meet up then? Shouldn't it stay like consistent throughout?
No, because fixed cost is fixed, right? So then as you're increasing quantity, it'll be decreasing, right?
Would it literally be from that graph, point B, just vertically straight up? Or would it be going vertically diagonally up to C?
So it would be straight up until it meets, but then it also slides along too. So
That's your marginal cost.
the average fixed cost is changing
So
as quantity changes.
here's where I think you're getting confused. Okay, if these lines were plotting total cost and variable cost, then you would be 100% right. That distance would always be exactly the same. But because it's average, as the costs get bigger, the fixed cost proportionally gets smaller. Does that make sense? Because your variable costs and your total costs are always going up, but your fixed cost is always staying the same number. So as they get bigger, proportionally that gap gets smaller, even though it's the same number constantly, because it's divided by quantity.
So it's not from like point B to C, it's
No.
just straight up.
Straight up.
Okay.
Straight up. Does that help? Okay. All right. Okay. Next one is number 9. In the short run, a purely competitive firm will always make an economic profit if remember this one.
Price is greater than average.
Close.
Price equals marginal
Huh?
cost.
What was that? It's if price is equal or is greater than average total cost. So price is equal to marginal cost would be profit maximization rule. Remember, you can make a profit without making an economic profit. Let's go over that real quick. Let's go over the difference between accounting profit and economic profit. Who wants to explain that to me real quick in the simplest terms that they can? Anybody have a go for it?
Did you make back what you put in?
Say that again?
Sorry, I couldn't
You
hear you.
make back what you put in for accounting profit? Like your
So
marginal
accounting profit
revenue.
would just be your revenue
Your
minus
revenue
cost, right?
Right, right. And that's the profit that you guys are going to hear in most of your other classes, right? Is that profit is equal to your revenue minus your costs, right? This is an accounting, or a normal. People call that normal too, right? You guys remember that? What is the difference with economic profit?
I think it includes the opportunity cost, so like things that
Okay.
you give up.
Yep, exactly. So then your economic profit is equal to your revenue minus your implicit and your explicit costs, right?
Might we go over what those are again?
Yeah, totally.
I have another question. So on the teaching notes, he kind of explains this, but I don't think I quite understand. Would you mind using this example that he has in the teaching notes?
Yeah, what's his example he does in the teaching notes?
Do you want it?
Sure.
Okay. It's B through D. I don't exactly understand.
Do you want to cover this while I read this real quick?
Sure. So what's an example of an explicit cost?
Explicit cost is a cost that is
You're handing over money, right?
it's like physical completely. Right?
Physical.
Buying
Had to pay for it.
insurance and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So it's an implicit cost.
It's one that's like hypothetically speaking, like
Foregone
not
wages.
going to work somewhere.
Mm-hmm. What'd you say?
Foregone wages.
Foregone wages. What else?
Neural ability.
I think so.
It's not like it's not documented.
It's not going to be on the
Yeah,
books,
there's
right?
no transaction.
No transactions, exactly. So it's also your opportunity cost, which is just like the foregone wages, stuff like that. So
So, for example, if I decided not to be an econ TA in the fall, and I decided to take another class instead, then part of my opportunity cost for taking that class, it's not just the tuition I would pay for that class, but it's also the wages I would have earned being a TA. So, $14 a month. Okay. So then you had an example from the teaching notes. So that one, it's a little convoluted, but the basic idea behind it is this woman is trying to start a business and she's trying to figure out where to get the money to start her business, okay? And so she has a couple of options. She can either pull money out of her savings account and use that to start the business, or she can get a loan and start the business. And so if she was just looking at the accounting profit, then she would just say, all right, the cost of starting the business is $500, or is $500,000, I think is what it was, right? $300,000. But if she was also looking at the the implicit cost, she would also be taking into account, if I left this money in my bank account, I would be making $15,000 interest on it every single year. And once I pull that out, I won't get that anymore. Does that make sense? So it's a foregone opportunity.
So she should get the loan.
Yeah, it just depends on the interest rate.
Right.
But does that make sense now? Okay. Cool. So where did we jump off on that? Okay, so does this make sense to everybody now? That explicit are just like your normal costs and implicit are opportunity costs. What was that?
So now this related to average total cost or price greater than average total cost. You can account for.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll run through that. Does this make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Sorry, I've been sick for like 3 weeks. At this point, I kind of hope so. Competitive firm always make an economic profit. Yeah, okay. So here's our average total cost, right? So when we look at price, right? If marginal cost curve with that. If let's say if this is purely competitive, right? Then price is equal to our marginal revenue. Then if this is here and it's above our average total cost curve, then the area between where these meet and the average total cost curve, that represents an economic profit. Does that make sense? And so if you were to make this area right here, would be an economic profit. You would also have an accounting profit, right? Because economic profit is always going to be smaller than accounting profit. Does that make sense? And if you were right here, so say this is 1, 2. If you were right here where these two meet, then you would only make an accounting profit. Question?
What's the line going on in the middle?
Marginal cost. Sorry.
So where the marginal cost and average total cost intersect, that's the economic profit.
Not quite. Not quite. So every time you look at one of these graphs, I want you guys to be looking for a profit maximization rule.
Is P1 down the lowest part of the average total cost, or is that just where they intersect?
That's just a coincidence. It kind of is on this one, but it won't always be.
So is it where it intersects? That's what you're going for?
Yeah, so what you're going to be looking at, so in a purely competitive market, your marginal revenue is equal to your price, right? Does that make sense why that is? Because in a perfectly competitive market, your additional revenue that you're getting is just equal to the price of the next unit. Does that make sense? It's also equal to your demand curve, in case you're wondering about that. So this might be something you want to write down. Okay, that in a perfectly competitive market, marginal revenue equals price equals demand. I would highly recommend you write that down.
Wait, say that one more time.
So in a perfectly competitive market, then this is always the case. Marginal revenue is equal to price is equal to demand. So if you're looking at a graph for a perfectly competitive market and you're like, where the creek is the demand curve and where's the marginal revenue curve, then just know it's always equal to price. Okay?
So if like you come across a question where it's like on this graph, what's the economic profit? You would say that shaded block, would you say it's the difference between price 2 and price 1?
Yeah, so the
And then
price
times quantity.
Times quantity.
Yeah, times whatever this would be. So this would probably be like a Q something. Q2, let's say. It's a good question. We'll get to some problems that are like that in just a minute. But just know, you guys, every time you see one of these and it's asking you, like the vast majority of problems, please use this. That's almost always what you're going to be looking at, okay? There's very few exceptions.
So the shaded area, again, what was that?
That's economic profit. Economic profit.
My marginal revenue is the same as your cost, marginal cost. Okay, that makes sense.
Not quite.
It's
I
equal.
mean,
Well,
that's how much
that's
you'll choose to produce.
Actually, I think I might have just screwed you up. Yeah, where those two meet, right?
Yeah.
But your marginal revenue is equal to your price.
Okay.
So you're always looking for where marginal revenue and marginal costs, where those two intersect.
Okay.
Because in monopolies and in like oligopolies and stuff, it'll look like this, where you'll have a demand curve and a marginal revenue curve, and you'll have price coming across. But in perfect competition, they're all the same line, they're just the price.
Yeah, and that's because the demand is like perfectly elastic.
Exactly.
So like for question number 10, when you don't have a marginal revenue little curve, where exactly are we looking for the quantity? Like which at which point will they intersect?
Q4, right? Number 10.
So you're saying in a perfect competition, which curves are the same?
Your marginal revenue, your price, and your demand are all just your price. Here, I'm going to write price in a different color. Underline it a few times. Okay? So in a perfectly competitive market, you're not going to see a marginal revenue curve or a demand curve. You're not going to see them. It's because they're both the price.
Why have redundant lines?
Huh?
Why have redundant lines?
Yeah, exactly. Or redundant labels that would help students. Does that make sense to everybody? So then let's look at number 10. Okay? So number 10, when market price is P1, a profit maximizing firm's total revenue can be represented by what?
P1 times by Q2. This price is equal to marginal cost.
Sorry, I need to it's close to me. Yeah. Yeah, does that make sense why that is? What was he? It's
P1
A.
times by Q2.
P1 times by Q2.
Because marginal cost
And this is
equals marginal revenue, so it's the same.
right. And we're talking about revenue, not profit. Just remember that.
Sorry.
No, you did it right. I'm just saying that's just a reminder. Does anybody want a little bit more explanation on that? Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Let's get this out.
Yeah, why is it Q2 and not Q3?
I think it's because you want marginal cost equals marginal revenue from that little formula right there up to the left. And then if you look at the red one right there, marginal revenue equals price, which is equal to demand. So at P1, where it says the market price is at P1, so I don't even know why B and C are even there, but I guess then you just go over to where the price of like P1 hits the marginal cost curve, and then you go down to see the quantity of that.
That was perfect. Did you guys understand that? Okay, for anybody who missed it, I'll just point it out on the graph. So it's fixed at P1, right? So this is your marginal revenue. You find where your marginal revenue equals your marginal cost, you're always going to do that. It's right here, okay? And then to find your total revenue, then you would just multiply it by the quantity and it'd be this square right here. Cool? Sweet, thank you. All right, let's go to 11. 11 we're starting using for P1. Okay, when market price is P4, a profit maximizing firm's total cost can be represented by the area of what? So P4 and total cost. What do you guys think?
Obviously,
Q4 times Q1.
P4 times Q1. Not quite.
well, it's total cost, not total revenue.
It's cost.
Or
So think about this. We were just showing you this, right? So revenue is equal to what? Or sorry, profit is equal to what?
Revenue minus costs.
Revenue minus costs, right? So revenue is all of the money you're going to be making, right? And then costs are your costs. Okay, so this right here is our profit, right? So if this whole square from here to here is our revenue, what would this square have to represent? Costs. Good job. So then this would be your costs. So what you're going to be doing is find the revenue square and then figure out, okay, how much of this is profit, how much of this is cost. Does that help? It is.
and you found out that the amount that was revenue, which is what we did earlier.
Right, because you're looking at your total costs, right? So how would you find the point where it splits that box in half?
Just what the lowest point of the ATC.
So it's just wherever this intersects the ATC. So here, let's walk through it.
P2 times Q4.
So, oh gosh, I didn't realize that you can't really see this. I'm sorry.
You try and zoom out.
Yeah. Okay. So when market price is P4, a profit maximizing firm's total cost can be represented by the area. So let's take a look at it. So if P4 is our marginal revenue, where's our profit maximizing point? Right, right? So this is our marginal revenue. We go over to where it meets our marginal cost. So it's right here, okay? So now we know that this P4 times our Q4, that is going to be our revenue, right? Okay? So we know that part of this box, this huge box right here, is going to be cost, and part of it's going to be profit. Hopefully. Hopefully. So then how do we figure out how much is profit?
It's going to be where
Boom, right? You take this point and you go down to the average total cost curve, okay? So right here, this rectangle is going to be our profit. So then how much is going to be our cost?
P2.
Everything else below that, right? So you look here, it's kind of hard to see because it's so small, but this is the P2 line where these two intersect, and it goes down. So then that box would be represented by P2 times Q4. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, cool.
Wait, so P2 times Q4 equals what?
Your costs, your total cost. Is everybody okay with that? Everybody's cool with that?
Question.
Go for it.
Okay, so let's see. So to maximize at P4 is just wherever it intersects with marginal cost. Seriously.
So firms are always going to want to produce where they're making the most profit or they're incurring the least loss, right? So whenever you're looking for where on this curve will a firm be operating, always use this. Like honestly, if I could make this jump out at you with 3D, I could. Because this will help you a lot on the exam. Always look for that. Always, always, always look for where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. I'm probably going to say it 5,000 more times. It's because you're going to use it a lot, okay? And then if you don't see a marginal revenue, check to see if it's perfect competition. It will be. And remember this little bugger right here. Okay? Cool. Okay, let's go to 12. When market price is P1, a profit maximizing firm's total profit or loss can be represented by which area?
E.
Okay, yeah, why is that?
You take price 1, you go over to the marginal cost curve where it hits that point, and then you go directly up to the ATC, and it hits at price 3, and it's a loss because your price is that much lower than the ATC.
That was really good. Well done. Did you guys all get that? Okay, cool.
No, they didn't.
They didn't? Totally fine. So, when market price is P1, so did you guys see what you did? Same thing we always do at the very beginning of one of these. What do you do?
I'm going to look where they cross.
Right, yeah, right. So here, since we're looking at P1, that's going to be our marginal revenue. So we go over to our marginal cost and we find that. And then we always look at the difference between that point and the ATC. If it was above, it'd be a profit, right? But since it's below, like he said, it's a loss. So that area right there, that's our loss. If it was up here, then that would be a profit. But since it's below the average total cost curve, it's a loss. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, then who can explain the shutdown rule to me? Real quick.
Price is less than average variable cost.
Good job, you can read. So this is something where a lot of people get caught up. So the shutdown rule, the reason why, sometimes you'll want to be operating at a loss even though you're losing money. Does that make sense? The reason for that is, if you're in this area between the average total cost curve and the average variable cost curve, if you're functioning, you'll still lose less money by selling than you would by stopping. Does that make sense? Because if you think about it, it means that you're making more money than your variable costs, so you're losing less than if you were to shut down completely.
Well, the way that I would look at it is like you're making money on what you're selling, but you're not making money as a company.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
Put it in like visual terms.
Yeah, it's like saying that, all right, if we shut down, we're going to lose, $100 a day. But if we, just off of utilities and rent and all this stuff, but if we sell, we'll probably sell $60. So then we'll still be losing money, but we should still be running, right? Because we'll lose less money. We'll lose 40 versus 100. Does that make sense? So when you see the shutdown rule, just think about that. Think about, okay, if I was to shut down completely, I'll lose $100. If I don't shut down, I'll still lose money, but I won't lose as much money. Okay? So a lot of people get snagged on that. It doesn't really make sense.
And even if they shut down temporarily, they still have to pay their fixed costs.
Right. Because even if you shut down, if I own a store and I stop selling, do I still have to pay my rent? Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. We were on 13. Oh, that segued really well. Okay, 13. A firm that shuts down temporarily. Yep, still has to pay its fixed costs, but not its variable costs. We just talked about it. Does that make sense to everybody? Think of like rent, utilities. Okay. 14.
What's the answer for that?
B, yeah. And he should be sending you guys out an answer key soon. So if you don't write down all the answers, don't freak out. You'll be fine. Okay. Raymond's Shoe Repair also produces custom-made shoes. When Mr. Raymond produces 12 pairs a week, the marginal cost of the 12 pairs is $84. And when the marginal revenue of that unit is $70. What would you advise Mr. Raymond to do? Good job. Can you explain that to me, bro?
Sure. So he's gotten to the point where his marginal cost is higher than his marginal revenue, so it's basically like his average variable cost is higher than his marginal revenue.
Right. So the way that you could explain it is, let's just dive into this right here, why this rule is the way that it is.
Can't you not know, for sure if you don't know, which part of the U-shaped graph you're at?
What was that?
The whole economy is a scale,
Yeah.
stuff, because, technically, with more information, it could be the case that he needs to produce even more shoes to
Increase his marginal revenue.
Yeah. So that's a good thought. If they were giving you total cost numbers, then that'd be different. But since this is marginal cost and marginal revenue, it's a little bit different. Because think about it this way. So let's just say you have here's your marginal cost. Here's your marginal revenue. Okay? So if you sell anywhere within this region, what's true about your marginal revenue when compared to your marginal cost? Yeah, it's greater, right? Because it'll always be, all right, here's my marginal revenue, here's my marginal cost. So on that unit, if I produce it, I'll be making that amount of profit. Is everybody cool with that so far? So then that is true all the way up until what point? Right, the point where you hit right here, where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? So when you hit that point, that quantity, you have reached the point where you are maximizing your profit. Because if you go any further out, what happens?
cost starts being greater than how much money it's made.
Right, the cost of producing that unit and selling it is greater than the money that you're getting in from it. Does that make sense? So that's why this rule is the way that it is. And so that's why it's so important. That's why you'll always be looking for this point, because firms always want to operate at that point. Because anything else, if you're this way, you're going to be losing money on additional units. And if you're this way, then you're not reaching your full potential. That makes sense? So then does that make sense in reference to the shoe thing, where he gives you the marginal cost and marginal revenue? So where is he on this graph? If we were looking at this shoe guy. Right, he's over here. So we don't really have the information to know whether or not he should shut down, but we do know he's overproducing.
So if we were like to attach numbers to that, the profit number would be highest at the equilibrium. If you went back, you would be lower profit.
Exactly.
Highest.
Exactly. And it could even be a loss, right? You could be running this at a loss, like we saw up here with this one, where this is where they met. You could be running at a loss, but that will be the best possible outcome for you, right? You'll be minimizing your loss. That's why it's either profit maximizing or loss minimizing. It's both, right? So it doesn't tell you whether or not you're going to make a profit or a loss, but no matter what, that point is where you will either make the most money or lose the least money. Cool? Awesome. Which one do we got? Okay.
So let's just produce fewer custom-made shoes.
Yeah. Shoes. Okay. An industry is a natural monopoly when. Karen, you want to take this one?
Mm-hmm. Natural monopoly when? Who knows?
At least two. Is it just 2 and 3?
Is it 2 and 3 or just 2?
It's so you guys are thinking what would make a monopoly? Like 2 would make a monopoly, but would it make a natural monopoly?
So is it just 3?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just 3. So a natural monopoly is when a monopoly is actually the best system that could work. Does that make sense? So a natural monopoly, think of it like when you think of the word natural, make sure you realize like, okay, it means that nobody's messing with it. So the government's not coming in and saying, all right, there's only one. And it just means that naturally it comes about, it works, it's the best system for that.
It's just the best firm. They're better than everybody.
Right.
They do it the cheapest.
Right. Like, for example, utilities is a natural monopoly because if you had competing water companies or competing power companies, you know, how's that going to work? You're going to have multiple power grids, you're going to have different drainage systems, different, you know, they're going to own different reservoirs, so stuff like that. That's a natural monopoly.
Tomorrow's revenue curve for monopoly firms depicted by curve. Which one? It's B. Why?
They're producing below the demand. Where the revenue's below the demand.
It's got to be demand or something.
Let's just go through and label this whole thing real quick. Are you guys cool with that?
Yes.
And I would actually recommend, as you guys go through, draw this a few times, like on your own, and then just label. Okay? Label all the curves.
That's the next 2 questions.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So which one's the marginal cost curve? Why?
Because it's the curve, because it's also the supply curve. Well,
Yes.
supply curve.
Yeah, and monopoly is
So do you?
it's curve C. So in monopoly, there's no supply curve, it's just the marginal cost curve, which is a supply curve.
And the marginal cost curve will always be, it will always look like that. It will always look like the supply curve, even if it's not the supply curve.
Yeah, that's true.
It's always upward sloping like that.
That's what.
So the one that's upward sloping like the supply curve is always the marginal cost.
Yeah. All right. What about curve A and curve B?
So which one is the average total cost curve?
Curve D.
Curve D.
D is the
Curve A is demand.
And then what about curve B? How do you
No,
guys?
it's not very no curve B. The curve A.
Huh?
Very no curve B is marginal revenue, right?
Yeah. Curve A. Right. How do you guys know which one of these is which?
Because marginal revenue is always going to be like below that demand curve in a monopoly.
That's right. So you'll see demand and marginal revenue will always look similar, but marginal revenue will always be lower than demand. Okay.
so
And then-
A was what?
The demand.
In a monopoly, right?
Yeah. And an oligopoly. But then in pure competition, they're the same line, right?
So
And then scroll back up. If you guys were to see another curve, they kind of look like this down here that was like a U shape. What would that be?
Variable cost.
Boom, well done.
Why is it not on there? It's just curves.
Just, you don't need it for this one.
wait, where would it be?
So if you saw another U-shaped curve right here below curve B, that would be your average variable cost curve, right?
So basically, you'll have two demand-looking curves. The top one is always going to be demand curve for a monopoly. The bottom one is going to be the marginal revenue, and then the supply-looking one, that's going to be average total cost.
Marginal average total cost would be the U-shaped one.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Question. So you said that if the variable average variable cost is above the average total cost, no,
It'll never be.
It'll never be.
Never be.
Okay.
That means
If the monopoly is currently producing Q3 units of output, then a decrease in output will necessarily cause profit to share Q3.
Are you guys in the video?
Increase. Say that louder.
At Q3, you're producing too much, so you have to reduce the amount you're producing in order to get to that marginal revenue, which equals marginal cost.
Which would be a Q2, right?
Can you explain that real quick? Sure. Okay, so profit can always be increased. All right. So what's our profit maximizing rule? I know I'm being really annoying about this. Okay, what's our profit maximizing rule?
Honestly, it's this, okay, so marginal revenue equals marginal cost.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's always going to be, whenever you see a problem with one of these graphs, that should be the first thing to pop into your mind.
Okay.
Okay? So then, which one of these curves is our marginal revenue, which one of these is our marginal cost?
So marginal cost is C, right?
Uh-huh.
And then marginal revenue would be D.
Yes. Yeah, good job. So then you go here, right? And then how do you figure out, so that's our profit maximizing quantity, right? So you go down here and that's a Q2.
Okay.
All right? See that? So then, will you read the question again?
Yeah, so it says if you're producing Q3 units, then a decrease in output will necessarily cause profit too.
So if this is your profit maximizing quantity and you're producing here, what would happen?
Can't make it too much, right?
Right. So if this is your profit maximizing quantity, right there, okay? This point right here on this line, what will happen if you move away from it either way? Right, because that is your maximum, right? That is the most you're going to get out of it. So if you move away from that, either way, profit's going to go down.
I was trying to like visualize it. But yes.
Yeah, because the marginal cost.
Yeah.
Because now the marginal cost is greater than the marginal revenue. So you're losing money.
It's B.
C. Profit would increase because this is a loss right now, right?
Yeah.
Because marginal cost is greater than marginal revenue.
Okay, number 21.
20.
I just want to, so is profit maximizing quantity always going to be the equal revenue?
Marginal revenue.
Yeah,
marginal cost.
It's always going to be where marginal revenue equals marginal cost.
The same thing as profit maximizing
And loss minimizing
all of
rule.
those words mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So your profit maximization rule, that's what I have it written over here as. Your profit maximizing / your loss minimizing is where your marginal revenue equals your marginal costs. Okay. Underline that.
Profit can always be increased by increasing the level of output by 1 unit if the monopolist is currently operating at
For Q1.
Yeah, we got it.
Explain it to us.
Because those are the ones that are below the quantity that's the profit maximum.
Exactly. Good job.
Everybody
Does
understand?
that make sense, everyone?
profit can only be increased.
What
was it A?
I don't know which.
It's A.
Yeah, it's A.
Because it's to the left of the profit maximizer.
Right. Exactly. Does that make sense to everyone? Anybody need a little clarification on that?
Makes sense.
What about B? B is 1, 2, or 3. So that
Because that Q2, that is the profit maximizing point. So if you
Yeah.
produce any more, you'll start taking loss.
Exactly.
Q2.
Oh, if it wants to maximize profit, what should that be?
Q4.
What's maximize profit? Isn't that Q2?
Yes. Q2. Q2. Does everybody get why that is? We're cool? Alright, sweet. I'm glad. Okay, pure monopolists may obtain economic profits in the long run because of what?
What else has me
That's not
Barriers of entry.
Oh, really good job. So remember, economic profit means that you're making a profit not only based off of the business that you're running, but also that you're making an economic profit. You're making more money than you could be elsewhere. So usually when there's an economic profit in industry, what happens is a bunch of people see that and they go, I'm going over into the industry, right? And then it goes and it goes until there's so many firms competing that all of a sudden there's no economic profit anymore. It's just an accounting profit. Does that make sense? So, but if people can't get into the industry because there's a barrier to entry, then the economic profit stays put because nobody else is coming in. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. 23, in an oligopoly. So this one's going to be comparing those 4 market types, okay? So you just have to read through the answers and see, all right, where does oligopoly fall, right? Because it's going to be comparing them to the 3 other types. So just read it carefully and see if you can tell us which one.
B.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is it B?
Because monopoly doesn't need to produce as much because it's beyond more producing.
Right.
And very competitive, they're not produce as much as they can to sell.
Right.
And oligopoly falls between those two. It doesn't have to produce as much as competitive, but they'll still be producing more than a monopoly.
Exactly. Exactly. That was a perfect answer. Everybody get that? Okay. Cool. Thank you for head nodding this time. There's been a couple of review sessions where people don't even head nod. I'll be like, does that make sense? And they just stare at me. And that makes me really self-conscious. What?
You don't know where you stand.
I'm like, okay, do I keep talking or do I shut up? All right.
In the prisoner's dilemma, what happens? Everybody remember the prisoner's dilemma?
D.
D? Who said that? Explain it.
Just because, what is it, like a rational consumer's always going to take what's the best outcome for himself.
Right. And there's dominant strategies in the prisoner's dilemma, right? The incentive to cheat within a cartel increases with an increase in the following factors, except
So cartels where people, well, is that when they collude?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like firms colluding together to fix prices. So this one, it's kind of weird, but you have to think about, all right, if more and more firms are coming in, what's going to cause a firm to get sketched out and want to cheat on the agreement? And what wouldn't? So this one's saying, all of these would be an incentive to cheat, but one. What do you think that one is?
Is it B?
Yeah, it's B. So if economic performance and industry sales are up, that's not an incentive to cheat. It's just if there's 2 firms that are colluding on something and their performance is doing really well, that's not going to incentivize them to cheat. But what might is if more firms come in, right? And they're saying, okay, we've got more competitors. It's more likely that somebody else will cheat, so we should cheat first. And then number of potential entrants in the industry, pretty much the same thing, right? And then the cost differences among firms, that can be an incentive to cheat as well.
Because then you undercut them, right?
It's
Right.
harder to detect who's cheating if there are more members.
Yeah, and it's more likely that somebody else will cheat, right? If it's just you and me and we reach an agreement that nobody's, like, let's say we're in a gang, probably the two least likely people to be in a gang in this room. Not that you guys are likely to be in a gang, but
You know, not already.
yeah, maybe you are. But if it's just us two and we make a pact not to confess to the police if we get caught, it's less likely that one of us is going to cheat. But if it's 20 of us, we're probably going to be thinking someone's going to snitch in here, right? Someone's who's going to talk. So that's the idea, the basic idea behind it. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Next one. So this is some game theory. Can I get a volunteer to read that scenario out? Thanks, man.
Each year, the United States considers renewal of most favored nation trading status with China. Historically, legislators have made threats of not renewing MFN status because of human rights abuses in China. The non-renewal of MFN trading status is likely to involve some retaliatory measure by China. The payoff table below shows the potential economic gains associated with the game in which China may impose trade sanctions against U.S. firms in the United States may not renew MFN status with China. The table contains the dollar value of all trade flow benefits to the United States and China.
Okay. Just gonna draw it out?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Really helpful on video too. Okay, so first question is, pursuing its own best interest, China will impose trade sanctions against U.S. firms if only the U.S. doesn't do that. The U.S. renews MFN with China, regardless of whether or not the U.S. Renews MFN status with China. None of the above is correct. In pursuing its best interest, China will in no case impose trade sanctions against U.S. firms. What's the right answer on that one?
It looks so confusing to me.
Okay, let's simplify game theory real quick, because this is something that people
Well, I understand it. It's just like all the words and stuff.
Like, there are a lot of words in there.
There's a lot of words.
Forget about it. Just look at the chart.
There's a lot of words.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it asking for in human terms?
In human terms? Okay, so it's pretty much saying that in this thing we've got China and we've got the US, right? They both have two options that they could take. And so then you just have to look at, all right, with these two options, this is going to be the amount of money that they obtain from pursuing that option. So then Tanner is writing it up here. We'll go over it real quick. We'll go over kind of some definition stuff too, like dominant strategies, Nash equilibrium, all that kind of stuff. Just real fast. Tanner's taking a whole class on game theory, so I'm going to let him do this section.
Pretty
Wouldn't it be B? He's just making us money in that game.
So, pursuing its own best interest, China will impose trade sanctions against U.S. firms. So we know that they're imposing, that's what we want to know. So acting in their best interests, they would rather be here, right? They're acting in their both best interests against, they would impose if
only if U.S. renews the words.
No. No, so they're going to impose regardless, right? So, because what you're going to be looking at is, all right, if I'm China, and I say, all right, yeah, and I say, all right, I'm not going to impose, what should I do if the U.S. doesn't renew?
Impose.
I should impose, right? What should I do if the U.S. does renew?
Still impose.
You should still impose, right? Because those are both greater, right? Those are both greater than what you would do if you didn't impose. Does that make sense?
so regardless of dominant strategy to impose.
Right. So regardless of what the U.S. does, we know that it'll be better for us if we impose, if we're China, assuming I'm China for some reason.
China is the top right part?
China
China's
is
the top.
both
are
of
their
these
choices.
two. Yeah.
Well, I mean the 75, 5,
Yeah.
25.
Yeah.
So it's going to be C.
It's going to be C. All right, and then let's flip it. What about the U.S.? Does the U.S. have a dominant strategy?
Okay, for the U.S.
Right.
No matter what.
Right. So then look at that. Why is that?
They're using 95.
Right. So what you do is you compare. All right. Let's see what we do. All right. If we don't impose, we'll make 65 if they. Or sorry, if we don't renew, we'll make 65 if they impose and 140 if they don't. And then if we look down here, all right, if we do impose, we'll make 35 and 130 depending on what they do. So when you compare those two scenarios, right? In both cases, don't renew is greater than if you do. Does that make sense? So this is a dominant strategy for the U.S. because regardless of what China does, we know that we'll be better off.
But is it? But because the question is saying like, the U.S. will renew MF and SAS with China, wouldn't it just be A, like only if China does not impose?
I mean,
It would be B.
yeah, but I mean, in like the long game, wouldn't it be better for them just that they would make more if China doesn't impose and the U.S. does renew?
Right.
MFN because that's higher than their dominant strategy.
Right. But the thing is that you don't know what the other person's going to do, right? And you can't bind them to it. So let's say Tanner is China and I'm the U.S. and we go in and we're having these negotiations. We both know that it'd be better for us to land right here, right? But what I'm suspicious of as the U.S. is if I leave and I'm like, okay, we're going to land over here, that Tanner is going to impose sanctions, and then all of a sudden, I'm making nothing and he's making it more. Does that make sense? And he's suspicious that I'm going to do the same thing to him.
That's like cheating on this agreement.
Right. So, if I'm covering my own butt and he's covering his own butt, then we're both going to pursue our dominant strategies, right? Where it's like, okay, I don't know what he's going to do, so I'm going to do what's best for me, regardless of what he does. Does that make sense? So regardless of what he does, it'd be better for me to do this. Because then I don't have to trust him. And I'll end up with a better result regardless of what he ends up doing. And the same thing for him. So that's what a dominant strategy is. It doesn't always mean that you're going to end up in the area that maximizes the benefit for both parties. It means that for you, on one side of it, it's the best strategy regardless of what the other person does.
This is like that homework question that was saying prisoners don't understand that if two people act in both their self-interest, a decline in society's benefit can occur like this because two people, they could if they had an agreement achieve higher profits, but they are not going to.
Right. So then let's move on to number 28.
27 is D, right?
Yeah, 27 was D. So then 28, if both countries follow a dominant strategy, the value of trade flow benefits to China will be what?
75.
75. Why is that?
Because they both, like, each one has a dominant of either, so the U.S., the dominant strategy would either be the top two, like top left or top right, and in China it would be the top left or bottom left. And
Right.
so the overlapping one is the top left. And so for China, that's 75 billion.
Right, exactly. So Tanner already did this, but I'm going to do it in color just to make it pop a little bit. So if the U.S. follows its dominant strategy, it's going to be up here, right? Because we determined that don't is the U.S.'s dominant strategy. So I mean, that's going to be one of the two results. And if China follows its dominant strategy, we know it's going to end up being one of these two. Okay? So if they both follow the dominant strategy, where do we end up? Right there.
So where's the Nash equilibrium in this chart?
Top left.
Right.
It's where they overlap.
And you guys, if there's a problem that asks you to find a Nash equilibrium, just do this exact same thing. Okay? So find a box. So what I like to do, or Tanner does too, is you just pick an outcome, all right? And then you say, all right, what they do, what's like my best outcome? Go through and circle them. And then anywhere where there's two circles where they overlap like that, that's a Nash equilibrium. There can be multiple.
Is the prisoner's dilemma the same thing as the Nash equilibrium?
It can be. So a prisoner's dilemma is just a certain type of game. So it can have a Nash equilibrium. In fact, it does.
Yeah, it also has, it's the same thing where they both have a dominant strategies, and yeah, this is really similar to
Prisoner's Dilemma. So,
Because by using your dominant strategy doesn't create an actual equilibrium.
no, only if they overlap. Just because I have a dominant
right.
strategy doesn't mean it's good for him.
Right.
you can have scenarios where we both have dominant strategies, but they don't end up at Nash equilibrium. Okay. You need more practice on that. We'll probably go a little bit deeper into game theory in some of our other review sessions. And also, just go through some homework problems and stuff and try and do a few examples of these.
So 29 is just going to be, you should follow its dominant strategy.
Yeah, let's go through that one real quick. Who's got that? Okay, assume the trade negotiators meet to discuss trade policy between the United States and China. If neither party in the negotiation is able to trust the other party, then what?
Follow its dominant strategy.
Yeah. Each should follow its dominant strategy. Good job. And why is B not true?
Because
They're not going
That's
to trust
not
each
true.
other to go for that.
Right. Right. And the Nash equilibrium is actually almost never the point where you maximize the benefit of both countries, right? Like in this case, here's our Nash equilibrium. It's actually where we have the least, I believe. Okay. Next one, 30. When strategic interactions are important to pricing and production decisions, a typical firm will what? Set the price of how its product equal to its marginal cost. Consider how competing firms will respond to its actions. Generally operate as if it is a monopolist, or consider exiting the market.
B.
It's B. Yeah, who can explain that?
Because strategy involves how other people are going to react. Like, are they going to react? I need to react how they're going to react. So
Right. And strategic interactions, when we're talking about game theory and strategy, it almost always has to do with oligopoly. Oligopolies, right? So you've got a few competitors, so then you can't set the price if you're in an oligopoly. You can manipulate it, but you can't set it. So that gets rid of A. You can't operate as if you're a monopolist, right? Because you're an oligopolist. And consider exiting the market, just not necessarily true. Does that make sense? Okay, we were so close, guys. 31. A significant difference between a monopolistically competitive firm and a purely competitive firm is that A, former does not seek to maximize profits. The latter recognizes that the price must be reduced to sell more output. Former sells similar, although not identical products, and former's demand curve is perfectly inelastic.
C.
It is C. Right, because remember, pure competition, identical products, monopolistic competition, similar but not identical products. Think fruit versus t-shirts, right? Okay. Last one, 32. As a general rule, monopolistic competition exists when the four-firm concentration ratio is what?
C.
Is C, less than 40%. Do you guys want to go over the four-firm and the Herfindahl real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to do four-firm?
Sure.
Do Herfindahl.
For firm is pretty easy. It's just, the C4 is just the total percent that's controlled by the top four firms, right? So if it's less than 40%, it's considered monopolistic competition. If it's greater than 40, then it's considered an oligopoly. But Herfindahl's better for that. But,
yeah.
So if the 12% of top four companies is less than 40%, then that means
it's monopolistic competition. And if it's greater, it's an oligopoly.
Percent of what?
Market share. So it's the percent of the market they own. And then we've got the Herfindahl index. Okay. So Herfindahl index, what you do is you take the market share of the biggest firm. Okay, so the percentage that the biggest firm owns, and you square it. And you add it to the percentage that the second biggest firm owns, and you square it. you add it to the percentage that the third biggest firm owns, and you square it. And it just goes on and on and on, okay? So if this was a pure monopoly, there's only one person in there, then you would have 100% squared, right? Be 10,000. So 10,000, a 10,000 Herfindahl index means that this is a pure monopoly. It's very concentrated, right? It's the most concentrated it could be. So then that's kind of the comparing point. And the more broken up it is, the lower this number will be, okay? So if you're asked to calculate a Herfindahl index, we'll do this real quick. And let's say you're given 5 firms. Okay, so the first one owns 30%. 2 owns 20%. Firm 3 owns 15. Firm 4, actually I'll do 16 here. 4 owns 14. And then firm 5 owns like 5. Okay. There would probably be a couple other ones, but let's just say that those are the only ones you have to worry about.
Would you only do the top 4, or do you do all?
For the C4 you would.
Yeah,
not for the Herfindahl.
Herfindahl, you do all.
For Herfindahl you do all the ones you're given.
Okay.
And the higher it is, the more oligopolistic the industry is.
The higher it is, it's not necessarily oligopolistic, but the higher it is, the more concentrated it is, right? Because if it's 10,000, it's a pure monopoly.
So the closer to 10,000.
The more concentrated it is. The fewer firms have control.
Gotcha.
So calculate both the 4-firm concentration ratio and the Herfindahl index for these numbers.
Herfindahl is 1777.
What did you say, 1777?
Yeah.
What?
Oh, okay.
1,777.
Oh, I see.
I was like 17,000.
Okay, so that's our Herfindahl index. What's the C4?
It's, let's see,
85.
No, just top 4.
Oh, right. 80.
80. Right. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody? So tell me, would this be considered a monopolistic competition or an oligopoly? Why?
Because it's above 40, but it's not at 100.
Right. Exactly. And if it's at 100, it doesn't actually mean it's a monopoly either, because let's say you've got 2 firms, right? Firm 1 has 50%, firm 2 has 50%. That C4 will still give you 100. That's why the Herfindahl index is important, because even though that C4 will give you 100, so you can't tell if that's a monopoly or not, it just means that those 4 top firms have 100% market share together. But Herfindahl will give you a different number.
And it would be like, say there's only 2 firms in the market, one could have 99 and one could have 1%.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah, you can split this however you want. It would still give you a C4 of 100, but it would give you a very different Herfindahl index.
yeah, it's just,
Okay, everybody good? Any other questions, or you good to go?
Sorry, one more. If
Sure.
it's less than 40%, is it a monopoly or a monopolistic competition?
What was that?
If it's less than 40%,
Oh, if it's less than 40%,
Yeah.
then it's a monopolistic competition.
competition.
All right. Well, good luck, guys. Hopefully, we'll see you at another one of these.
Yeah.
Tomorrow at 5. Tomorrow at 5, and then Tuesday, our finals week. Same place.
When is the finals?
Finals on Thursday.
What time is it on Tuesday again?
Oh,
On Tuesday, it'll be at 5 p.m.
so it's Thursday at 11 a.m.
Yep.
in the class.
Yep. All right. Good luck, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
this final is like comprehensive, like how comprehensive?
There will be stuff in the